And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, back to the Valley of the Judged. I am your one and only gaming monk, better known as Mildra, and with me, as always, is my good brother here in the temple, the man who's triggering people over all of their holiday meals when it's not me who's doing it. Good brother Monarch.
I mean, I could be trying to trigger people over saying that Corpse Bride was better than Nightmare Before Christmas. But I don't know if we want to go down that route.
I've already got some people looking at me like I'm crazy when I say Hogfather Night is a Christmas movie. and some people go doing the same thing when I say Endless Waltz is a Christmas movie. Yes, it is. But you know what? But you know what is a Christmas game? Max Payne.
I never played Max Payne, so I'll just go with you on this one.
Oh.
Just because it might irritate some people, I'll go with you on it.
I just know that the only good thing that came out of the Die Hard as a Christmas movie debacle was the time a bunch of journalists live tweeted like they were at Nakatomi Plaza on Christmas Eve. I wish I had screen caps of that. I'm pretty sure if you dug around deep enough you could find it, though this was like 5 or so years ago. But it was just a amusing thing to witness. So, speaking of witnessing, I think we're all familiar on some level or another with the phrase elephant in the room. You know, because elephants are big and hard to ignore. And when it comes to cyberpunk settings, the big elephant in the room that is gonna have to be addressed at some point is the cyber part of that cyberpunk. Not just prosthetics, we've already tackled that, but the idea of hacking. Since, well, cyberpunk became a thing in the early days of the internet. And is always going to be a key part of it. Now, this is one thing that is notorious when it comes to cyberpunk games because a lot of them have very complicated systems that end up turning a hacking setup or hacking scene into a duet between the hacker and the GM.
While everyone else is just, I don't know, playing with themselves or something.
Mm-hmm. Now,
whatever you did back in the day before you had internet connected smartphones and two guys are just like, all right, we're going to keep playing this game. Yeah. Fuck all the rest of you.
Now, we are not too unfamiliar in this series with this particular topic because I did bring this up when we covered Brass and Steel. Because let's be honest, the dreaming in that system was basically a hacking system in everything but name. Yeah. But that would manage to avoid the problem because even if you're not the hacker, you can still contribute.
I will say I don't think it 100% avoided it because the focus for however long you were in the Dreamscape is still going to be on whoever the Dreamscape guy is. But it was certainly way better than I've seen in a lot of hacking systems, because, again, everyone is at least able to do something.
Yeah. And I know the common retort is, well, just have more than one hacker. That's not how people build parties in games. Much in the same way that there's always going to be a degree of awkwardness if you have two people who are wizards in a Pathfinder game, for instance. Yeah. Granted, you can alleviate it by having like one person who's a wizard, another person who's a druid or a warlock or something. But that awkwardness is still going to be there.
Yeah. I will say if you're going to go the everyone be a hacker route, a decent enough template, you wouldn't want to do it exactly like they did, but what they did with Starfinder and the whole thing with the pilots is other skills were used that anyone would be picking up anyway in place of stuff you would be able to do on the ships. So it's not like you're having to like build an entirely different guy or a guy just for that. It's just kind of going to go with the flow. I don't think that system did a great job executing it, but the idea was sound.
Well, obviously they were constrained with. I'm assuming you're talking Starfinder First Edition.
Was there a second edition?
Yes.
I stopped kind of following that. But yes. It was a good idea. And something like that could be done for hacking, I imagine.
Yeah. The point is, it's one of those things that whenever hacking gets brought up in the conversation with cyberpunk games, you can usually hear a very audible groan because of what's about to happen.
Yeah.
Now, fortunately, we have seen more and more games find ways to avoid that by not having it be this wholly separate thing, which I'd say is one of the easiest ways to avoid it.
Yeah.
And obviously, you have cases like Cyberpunk 2077, where net running is just part of the combat suite.
Yeah.
And both Vault and Subversion kind of do that as well. But for the Gaia complex, we have it in two forms: the core, which is the equivalent to the Matrix or the Internet or what have you, and biohacking, both of which we will be getting into tonight. And the first thing that brings up is jacking in, where it talks a bit about what the core is, about how it's kind of it is similar but different to the Internet of old, just brought up to the way New Europe works. And then we get into using the core. Anyone is free to access the core from one of the public terminals found on the streets, in cafes, or scattered throughout the commercial districts of the metropolis. These terminals allow access to all publicly shared information and can be navigated by anyone who can press buttons and type a search criteria into the touchscreen. Using the core's information archives is relatively safe, whether that be through a public terminal or a character's own rig via an external access point. Anyone with an installed neural frame is able to view these data archives in a 3D/VR format. Any use of the core beyond the data archives must be done in full immersion. It is not possible to simply read the data off a screen. In order to delve deeper and perform any level of hacking activity, a few more things are needed. 1. A hacking rig. Self-explanatory. So they can come either handheld or desktop versions. This would be the equivalent of, say, a cyberdeck in Shadowrun. A neural frame. A cybernetic brain upgrade that allows the user to interface with the digital landscape. All the plugs that you see on the back of people's necks in, say, Ghost in the Shell, that would probably qualify as the neural frame. And jack sockets and leads. Cables that run from the user to a rig and or access point. Those with a neural rig simply need a single set of cables to run from sockets somewhere on their person directly into an access point. Those with a hard rig use it as an intermediary, plugging themselves into it, and then connecting the rig to an access point, requiring 2 sets of cables. And then we get to hacking. And
so, hacking is a term... Oh, I'm sorry, what was that?
I'll let you take this one since I established the preamble about the core.
So, hacking is a term given to moving below the information archives of the core. Doing so requires a rig to penetrate and a range of software to both protect the user and perform specific tasks once inside. Going this deep moves beyond words on a screen and becomes a detailed virtual world of neon and wires to be explored by the hacker senses. Jacking into a rig and accessing the core requires a successful skill test. The process takes 5 to 10 seconds, but once inside, time moves at a different pace than it does for those in meat space. I've always liked that term. But what seems like 10 minutes of navigating the digital pathways of the core passes by in a matter of seconds to those standing around in the real world. Once jacked into a rig, the hacker's body enters a hypnotic state where all of their senses are entirely dedicated to the digital world. While it's possible to listen to those around you and verbally respond during a hack, an awareness skill test is required to take part in a conversation or to focus on important information. Any physical movement requires the hacker to jack out of their rig. The shift in time perception makes interacting with the outside world somewhat confusing due to the lack of outside perception. It pays to have protection if you're going to be in the core for long. In order to not break the flow of the game too much, activities within the core have been simplified to prevent those players who are not jacked in from simply standing around and waiting. To avoid extended periods of downtime for players outside of a combat situation, it is suggested that the following guidelines are observed during hacking runs. The hacker should be clear about their objective. The core is not a place for browsing, so work out what the aim of the hack is. Are you looking for hidden R&D data or system access codes? Then the GM is advised to determine upfront exactly how many layers the security core hacker will need to pass in order to achieve the goal, though they do not need to share this information with the hacker. Once the number of layers has been decided, the type of defense can be chosen from the hacking countermeasures list at the end of this chapter. Once jacked in, role-playing the process works best. The Gear and Tech chapter contains a sizable list of programs to cover all kinds of eventualities. Does the hacker have something that will bypass the defenses? If so, the GM can either let them overcome those countermeasures or request an additional hacking test be performed in order to pass. The GM should feel free to be creative if a specific program is not available, and either ask for further hacking tests to be undertaken, or provide the player with a riddle or visual puzzle to solve in order to get through. This works best if done under a time limit and no assistance from other players, forcing the hacker to solve the challenge on their own. These are some pretty good guidelines. I'd be hesitant about the puzzle bit just because who knows how long that's going to take a guy to solve.
That, and as a general rule, people are hesitant about putting puzzles in their campaigns just because sometimes even the simplest puzzles can take players hours because they're looking at the wrong things.
Yeah. Everyone's going to have a dumb moment. Either the players or the GM with a puzzle in his head seems simple.
As I keep saying...
Yeah.
Not saying that. Excuse me. You don't need to have blonde hair to have a blonde moment.
Yeah. Yes, then to follow up on this though, during a combat situation, jacking into the core typically takes 2 combat rounds. A hacker who is jacked into the core can perform a single action alongside the characters who are taking part in the combat. The difference in time perception measures up nicely here, with the time taken to navigate through a single countermeasure or find an objective taking roughly the same amount of time as a round of combat. Such as, a single hacking action could entail using a program to overcome a countermeasure, decrypting a file, moving to a new location within the core, or anything else the DM deems suitable. Failed hacking tests will lead to triggering countermeasures, suffering harm, or being subject to a trace being launched, which could lead to the location of the user's access point being revealed. A critical failure represents a successful trace, which leads to the hacker being tagged by NVI watchdogs, who will immediately dispatch an enforcement team to the hacker's location, where they will search for the guilty party and sever the access point. When this happens, it is usually time to run. Assuming the hacker achieves their objective, they are able to jack out almost immediately, ending the session.
Mm-hmm.
So this does seem to kind of get around a lot of the issues earlier you'd see. Hacking's not entirely removed from combat, which I do like. Like the mid-combat hacking stuff is kind of a staple that people imagine in their heads when they picture what's going on in a cyberpunk setting.
Yeah.
You're not separating the game between two different parts. Momentarily, yes, outside of combat, but the guidelines are there to keep that from becoming excessive.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not going to be something that just leaves players fiddling around doing nothing for too long. So yeah, I really like this opening section detailing how to handle this.
Yep. And then we get to programming, or the art of creating your own programs. The most hacking programs are easily available to mercs operating in the metropolis. There may come a time that a hacker feels confident enough to make their own variant programs or needs to drum up something new to overcome countermeasures that have been created by the GM. Programming occurs in meat space, requiring tools and a rig. There are 2 steps to creating a new program. First, prepare the chip. Chips can be purchased cheaply, or an existing program can be overwritten to reuse the chip. Some advanced programs may require the chip to be modified at GM's discretion, which requires a successful electronic skill test and between 30 and 60 minutes of time. Then create the program. Programming can be very time-consuming and is rarely completed in a single session, unless something very simple is being written. A programming skill test is required, applying a modifier between +1 and +3, depending on the complexity of the program. The GM may require the test be undertaken multiple times over the course of a time period or multiple sessions in order to perfect the program. Coding something from scratch can take anywhere from a few hours to a few weeks. Regardless of how long it takes and how many skill tests are performed, the final programming skill test must be rolled by the GM on behalf of the player. No grit may be applied to this roll, and the outcome is not revealed to the player. The only way to find out if a program works is to test it. Successfully created programs will work as planned, but those which fail the final test may not. At the GM's discretion, application of a failed program will most commonly lead to immediate failure, or a modifier of +2 being applied to any hacking skill test associated with it. A critical failure on the final test will lead to the program failing to work and inflicting up to 10 damage on the user on its first use, as specified by the GM. So be careful when using shoddy code.
Especially when that shoddy code is running in your mind.
Yes. But then we have hacking countermeasures. The following list comprises the most common types of countermeasures that a hacker will encounter when running the core. And of course, there's the usual. Feel free to have the GM create their own if the idea that they have doesn't fit. So, and obviously, there's personal countermeasures that are available to protect your rig that are in the Gear and Tech chapter. We'll get to that later. So, we have things like a code wall, which is pretty common protection, a data wall, a code wall on steroids, a glacial wall, a code wall on all the steroids, a mind prison, an AI program designed to fool the hacker's mind into thinking they've been caught and are no longer in the core, a cortex trap, which is a more advanced mind prison, a sentinel, a sentry-type countermeasure, a watchdog, which is designed to trigger trackers, a neural bomb, which is basically the fuck you button, a reverse infection, a viral type security countermeasure that attempts to infect a hacker's rig and either employ or delete their own software, and a tracker, which is not a standalone countermeasure, but a protocol run by other countermeasures in an attempt to identify the location of the hacker. So a decent spread out.
I think that'll cover what most players are going to want.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, room for more.
And then we have biohacking, which is a unique end of hacking that we don't really have an equivalent of in a lot of cyberpunk settings.
So we'll start with
a beautiful mind.
There we go. My PDF was acting slow for a second for some reason. So, biohacking is the art of using modern hacking technology in order to jack directly into the neural frame of a subject. The occurrence of this psychological hijacking has risen steadily over the last 5 years, with biohacking gradually becoming the greatest fear for corporate execs. More and more corporate troubleshooters are recruiting merc teams for enhanced snatch and grab missions, grabbing an exec, hacking their minds, stealing their secrets. Due to increased risk, biohacking countermeasures have become big business for software companies, and the punishments delivered by the Gaia's police force for anyone proven to have committed this highly illegal act. Now, I think we might just skip over like the rest of A Beautiful Mind, as this seems like a lot of more kind of fluff and explanation.
Yeah, although
very nice, it's all here.
I know some of you were thinking of Inception. You're not far off.
And then biohacking. Biohacking is done one of two ways, either by using the core to locate and access a subject's neural frame, or by plugging directly into cable jack ports on their person. A subject who does not possess a neural frame cannot be biohacked. Hacking into a neural frame through the core requires a user to jack into the core in the normal manner and locate the target within the network. This can be very time-consuming and tricky, especially if the target's locale is not known. Locating a subject is best performed through roleplay, though the GM may call for additional hacking tests if required. All neural frames have a single default hacking countermeasure called frame guard, as detailed under the biohacking countermeasures. If this layer of security is broken, the hack is successful. Breaking the security requires the right software and a hacking skill test with a +1 modifier to the roll. Sometimes additional countermeasures may be in place and must be contended with. Hacking into a subject directly through jack ports on their body is obviously much riskier. You need to have the subject restrained long enough to allow you to do it, but unless expensive upgrades have been purchased, the frame guard countermeasure is automatically bypassed. A simple hacking skill test with a modifier of -2 applied to the roll is required to access the subject's neural frame. A subject that has been biohacked enters a sleep-like state for the duration of the hack, unless forced servitude is attempted. Though it is not possible to biohack someone that does not possess a neural frame, it is possible to directly jack into connections on external cybernetics in order to deactivate them and effectively uninstall them from the owner's mind. When this occurs, the cybernetic becomes little more than dead weights until the process is reversed, or a cyberdoc is able to run a reinstallation process. Vampires cannot be biohacked. I'm sorry, I don't think we've seen anything about vampires brought up yet.
Yeah, vampires...
It just seems like a weird place for them to suddenly be introduced.
Vampires were introduced a bit in the fluff chapter, but in terms of the crunch, they're not going to make as much of an appearance until Violent by Design, which is one of the recent expansions. And obviously we're not covering the expansions.
Yeah, but even if they have a neural frame installed from before they were turned, their minds are simply structured too differently. Ferals may be biohacked in the same way as a human. So the end goal of most biohacks is to steal from a target's mind. Memories, knowledge, secrets, and desires. Extremely skilled hackers, armed with the right programs, are also able to plant ideas, though the impact of such work is questionable and rarely trusted. The Inception comparisons are just making themselves. So, when a successful biohack has been performed, the biohacker may extract one piece of information, which can be as specific or general as required. Additional information may be provided as well at the GM's discretion, though further hacking skill tests may be requested in order to obtain more. A failed test will immediately eject the user from the subject's mind, jack them out, and cause both hacker and subject to suffer 3p damage, which cannot be prevented, even with protective software. A critical failure increases this damage to 1d12 plus 2. During combat, apply the same concepts as applied to core hacking. So a single action will allow a character to use a program, extract information, or do anything else that the GM deems suitable. And planting thoughts. So biohacking can use to plant thoughts, so the process is more complex. The art of planting thoughts in a target's mind is one that has become big business for mercs. Pushing a court to resign or turn traitor, influencing a criminal to give themselves up, etc. Planning thoughts requires additional specialized software and a hacking skill test with a +1 modifier. A successful test allows for one simple thought to be planted and take hold. Such plants may not be overly specific, but may be clear enough that they should lead to the desired result in time. For example, I want to kill my business partner is unlikely to take hold due to the extreme nature of the idea. But my business partner has betrayed me and I must take action is far more likely to root itself in the mind and in time is likely to result in the same desired outcome. The exact outcome of any planted thoughts are to be determined by the GM.
Mm-hmm. So
and for
it really
okay.
I was half joking about the Inception thing.
That's what it is. It's Inception.
I mean, yeah, on both ends. The only thing that isn't here is the whole creating the dream world, but that's something that can be accomplished through roleplay.
Yeah.
And truth be told, that's something I'd use as a kind of long-form thing to set up where the scene of the crime is, as opposed to something that's done in the middle of combat. But there's a small part of me that finds biohacking far more terrifying than regular hacking.
Oh yeah, it's because you're fucking with someone's actual brain.
Pretty much. I could also imagine it being used by mercenary groups to speed learn a la the Matrix. You know, where one program later and now you know how to pilot a helicopter. But obviously after that you have the different countermeasures. Some of these are listed in the Gear and Tech chapter, but there are some specialized ones just for biohacking. The first is Frame Guard, which is a default kind of protective barrier, basically the biohacking version of a code wall. Then you have Earthlock, which is a defense mechanism against biohacking as a secondary wall behind a frame guard. It puts in a modifier of +3, and if you fail, then whoever attempts the biohacking suffers 3d3 plus 3 damage, which, given the way damage works out, that's a hefty amount. I mean, that's it. That's anywhere from 6 to 12 damage. That's quite a bit. So don't screw up.
Yeah.
See, then we have NVI Sec Protect, which works in a similar manner, has a modifier of +2. Failure to overcome Sec Protect inflicts D12 plus 1 damage, which is pretty nasty, but not nearly as nasty as Earthlock. I think because the
potential is higher,
mm-hmm.
but it's a lot higher chance you're going to get lower where even that 6 on Earthwalk, it's almost guaranteed you're going to take more than 6 compared to a somewhat safe chance of only taking 2 off Sec Protect.
Yeah. Then we have NVI Sec Trace, which is a corporate-only security system designed to detect biohacks and then initiate a tracker. And then NVI Last Line, which I think the name itself kind of says it. If it's activated, it detects the hack and then erases the operating system for the user's neural frame, causing massive brain damage and total amnesia. Breaking Last Line requires very rare and expensive software, and a modifier of +3 is applied to all hacking skill tests to overcome it. Failure to overcome the countermeasure will result in immediate brain death of the target, killing them outright and causing 2d12 plus 3 damage to the biohacker.
See, that is an average of, what, 17?
Yeah.
I think is what that works out to.
I think the name Last Line is appropriate in that case. But since that covers both the core and biohacking, compared to other cyberpunk settings that we've seen that have had a hacking system, this one is obviously a lot simpler. And as far as avoiding the duet problem, where would you say this one lands? Is it avoided or is it bandaged?
I think we could put this in avoided. Because if it didn't have that really nice set of guidelines, I'd be tempted to say bandaged. But it does set up exactly how to do this, so it's not just murdering the fun of everybody else who isn't the hacker. Now, you could still do that, but if you go that far with it, that's on the DM and the hacker, not the system.
Yeah, if at that particular point, it's a case of nom-fa. NMFP, not my fucking problem.
Yeah.
I'd say...
No, I recall it saying it takes, 2 rounds to hack in?
Yeah.
I'd be a little hesitant with that, just because... Again, I don't like just taking someone out for even 2 rounds.
Yeah, but that falls into some of the 2-round stuff that we talked about last week.
Yeah, like it's not a deal breaker. But I might cut that back a little bit.
I think what certainly helps is that the bigger point when it comes to hacking is in the countermeasures and programs. I'm almost tempted to jump into the gear and tech chapter to see some example programs, but that's not going to be until a couple weeks.
Yeah,
and I do find it kind of amusing, and I'm not faulting this particular system, but whenever we have far future cyberpunk settings, the idea of wireless internet, something that is standard nowadays, is not put into a lot of mechanics. Shadowrun put it in, and for some reason people hate it. Mostly because it is change, and change is scary. But I think it is something that should be considered when it comes to cyberpunk. It is the fact that wireless communication is more and more a thing. I know for the dedicated hacker, they're not going to be doing their stuff wirelessly.
Yeah. I kind of suspect that's why. Because in everyone's head, just how unsecure wireless can really get.
As a countermeasure,
I'm not saying you can't.
As a counterpoint, even in the earliest days of radio communication, phone phreaking was a thing.
Yeah.
Uh, like the story of Captain Crunch causing a bunch of hack jobs with a plastic whistle. There actually is some truth to that.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. Is like I kind of see why, especially when comparing to the more modern tech and stuff, the wireless is going to be less secure. But we're at future shit. Make up some bullshit to cover your ass in the game mechanics.
Yeah.
I see why.
Yeah,
so I'm not gonna fault them for not doing it.
Mm-hmm. For me, it's.
But it would be nice to see some people try it out.
Yeah, and it's. I'd say it would be relatively easy to do it here. And because of the fact that neural linking is a big part of the setup, that does mean that the problem is somewhat mitigated.
I think that might have to also do in part, and a lot of those other cyberpunk systems I've seen, they really do go the route that it is a very complex system with a lot of different moving parts and factors. Whereas here, everything's a lot more simplified.
Which sometimes I feel like some designers put in that level of complexity so as a means to try and flex instead of having something that suits the game in question. Yeah. Then again,
I do think Cyberpunk does lend itself to really complex systems without just having to be a flex, but
a lot of it is and this is something I've talked about, and this is something I've gotten in trouble about in the past, that a lot of the ways people approach Cyberpunk is still stuck in the 1980s. Still acting like we're still in that assumption by futurists in the 80s about what the future would look like. And I kind of tried to explore this a while back when I did that experiment about a non-dystopian cyberpunk. And I got a bunch of people saying, oh, if you don't have a dystopia, then you don't have conflict. Which I never said. I was just exploring whether or not cyberpunk needs that late-stage corporate dystopia in order to be cyberpunk. Or if that's just something that we've psyched ourselves into thinking. You know, just extensive peer pressure. I'm not saying it's one way or the other, but I think it's something that should be considered. You know, much like there's the whole thing of people psyching themselves into thinking that fantasy has to be doing a Western European pastiche. And of course, you and I know that that's not the case.
Yeah.
But with that said, I know this was a light one, but that's because these were lighter chapters once you get past the fluff part of things. And we'll be revisiting that in a couple weeks when we get into things like equipment and our final thoughts on the Gaia complex. But next week, in keeping with our 3-in-1 rule in the temple, we're going to be talking about a one-shot, specifically the quick start for the Voltron RPG. Now, I'm going to be using the quick start for Legendary Defender because Defender of the Universe doesn't have a quick start, and they're both using the same mechanics, so it's not going to be that much of a deal breaker. But that's what I've got planned for next week. That being said, tomorrow, Nephenor and I are going to be continuing the look at Tokyo Conception. Zan, unfortunately, because of his new job, has to bow out, so Neph is filling in for him. And that is going to be interesting, although there's a small part of me that wonders if I should have switched the positions, especially given the relationship that those two games have, but hindsight is what it is. So until then, on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, my name is Mildra, I am your gaming monk. Stay fucking frosty, everybody!
上楽な情緒